Hi, my name is David Meyer of Meyer Global Filters, and today we're going to take you through 3 steps to teach you how to read the Magnehelic gauges properly. Magnehelic gauges are a mystery to a lot of people, but today we're going to take it a step at a time and show you how to save hundreds of dollars on your air filters by using your Magnehelic gauge. Hi. Let's get started today. First of all, do I have any questions?
Yes. What is a Magnehelic gauge used for?
Well, that's a very good question. A Magnehelic gauge that is placed on the filter banks is used to determine the initial resistance and the differential pressure across a clean filter, expressed in inches of water gauge, synonymous with initial pressure drop. Also, remember that the Magnehelic gauge is just a guide. Is there any more questions?
Yeah. How do I read my Magnehelic gauge, and why are they based on different inches?
Another very good question. All right. When filters were first introduced, years and years and years ago, they were all basically, you took them out before 1 inch. So most of your gauges were 1 inch in your commercial end of it. As filters got better, you could take a filter out at 1.25 inches, even today at 1.5 inches on some filters. So that's where the 2-inch gauge would come in. Now when it comes to a HEPA filter, a HEPA filter will start around 1.5 inches of static. So you would need a 3-inch gauge to judge the HEPA filter. Okay, before we get into the class, is there any more questions?
Yes. How can I calculate my Magnehelic gauge so I can understand it?
Well, you have to understand this. From when they build new construction, most of your new construction is based off, let's say it's a 24-24-2 or 24-24-12 filter. It doesn't matter. They're based off 2,000 CFM, 500 foot per minute. So if you have 10 filters in the filter bank, you can look at the plans and it'll say that this is a 20,000 CFM unit. Okay? So that when you base your Magnehelic gauge, it's also based off of 2,000 CFM. So let's say that you have a unit that has variable speed on it, where you can turn the speed up and down. Of course, if you have it less than 2,000 CFM, it's going to affect the gauge. If you have it more, it's going to affect the gauge. If you have outside air coming in, it's going to affect the air. Through the louvers can affect the air. Some people actually take the unit and duck it into another unit, which again affects what air is coming in. And all these things change the 2,000 CFM that the Magnehelic gauge is based on. So even though the Magnehelic gauge may be working perfectly, I would say most of the time you're not going to get an accurate reading. Now, with each DVD that you get for this Magnehelic gauge class, you will also get this service log. This service log can be very, very, very helpful to you, as it does have the unit number of your air conditioning. It does have the pre-filters, the final filters. It has on there all the part numbers, the quantities. It has everything you need to know about your unit. And down below is where we get into what we have here on the board, where you're going to understand every little thing about how to get to the proper reading to take the filters out on time. One thing I want to mention on the Magnehelic gauge itself, there's a little screw hole right here on the bottom. And there's a lot of misconception of what that's used for. Some people will look at the back of a cut sheet of a filter and see it's supposed to be a certain water gauge when it's brand new, and if it's not there, they'll take the screw and they'll move it up a little to fit there. That's really not what that screw is used for. When you turn off the unit, the Magnehelic gauge will reset to 0. And if it doesn't reset to 0, all you do is take the little screwdriver, push the screw down and set it to 0. That's what it's used for. Okay, let's get started. Now, there's 3 main steps in the Meyer Global Mag Gauge reading system. And I'm going to go over those 3 steps with you right now. You have to know these 3 steps or it won't work. First of all, let's look at the filter we're going to use. We're going to use a 4V mini pleat filter. So if you go to the back, any filter you have has a product sheet. And on the back of the product sheet gives you all the information about that filter. Very important. On this particular filter, it's a 24-24-12. It's a MERV 14-A, which means fine fiber. And it has a reading of 0.31. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first step. We know now the filter we're putting in and installing in the unit, we're going to put it over here, get your service log, and look for where it says official water gauge of new filter being installed. Here we're going to put it right here. A 3-1, you're going to write it down on your sheet. That's step number 1. Step number 2, when you put the new filters in and they're installed, you turn on the unit. You have to wait a little bit because it takes a while for it to build up. But after you're sure everything's running good, the mag gauge is up to where it's going to be, then you take a look at it. Now, 70% of the time it's going to read low. It sometimes reads high, but most of the time it's going to read low or where it's supposed to be. Now in this case, we're going to say that the reading, instead of a 3-1 where it was supposed to be, it's not getting 2000 CFM across the filters anymore, so now it's reading a 0.25. So for this demonstration, we're going to take the 2.5, take your service log, and write it down on gauge reading after new filters installed. A 0.25. Now we're 2 steps in to getting a good reading. What is the 3rd step? Well, the 3rd step is really up to the facility. It could be a hospital, it could be a building, it could be a complex, anything. But whoever's in charge needs to decide, when are you taking the filters out? In this case, we're going to say like it's a hospital. A lot of hospitals like to take out early, make sure they're safe. They'll take out at a 0.75. So that's the number we're going to use. This is the 3rd step. You decide, put it on your service log, you'll see, you decide final reading, right here, 0.75. Now those are the 3 steps. If you know those, you're going to be very accurate. Maybe not 100%, but very accurate in taking out your filters. Okay, we got the 3 most important steps you have to have in the Meyer Global system to read your Magnehelic gauge properly. Now let's move on to the next step. What is the next step? Again, to recap, 0.025 is what the reading was after we put in the new filters. It should have been a 0.031. And you decided to take it out at a 0.075. We don't have the zeros on there now because we don't have rooms, but anything below an inch has a 0 in front of it. So our next step is difference of water gauge readings. Look at that on your service log and write this down. Now what I want to know from you is, what is the difference between 0.025 and 0.031? Does anybody know? Yeah, that's it. The difference is a minus 0.06. Everybody see that? How'd I got that? I took a 0.025 from a 0.031, and I got, after deducting the 6, I got 0.06. That's my difference between these 2 numbers. Now, we need to know the last step, which is the new filter adjusted reading changeout. So, what do we do? How do we get to that? How do we get to the final number now that we have all of this? Does anybody know what the final number is? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So the new reading is 0.069. Now, again, how'd we get there? Well, we deducted the 2.5 from the 3.1. We got the 0.06. We took the 0.06 from the 7.5, and now we know at 0.069, that's really 0.075 where they wanted us to take it out. Now remember, a Magnehelic gauge is not gospel. It's a gauge. So what we have to do is, we have to go in, maybe a 0.62, 0.64, look at the filters and see what condition they're in. just to double check it. Okay, now let's do this a different way. Let's assume that we're using the same filter. I'm going to put it up here for you. The official water gauge reading of the new filter installed, the same filter, 0.031. Now, let's say this time that the gauge reading after the filters were installed was higher. It was a 0.035. This has happened, and I've seen it on very few units, but it does happen, okay, in case you run across it. Now, well, let's say this time you decided to take it out at an inch, 1 inch, instead of the 0.75. So now, to get to our difference of the water gauge readings, again, write this down on your paper, this would be a plus. Anything over this number is now a plus. So what we have to do is deduct the 0.31 from the 0.35. So does anybody know that answer? Yes, that's the answer. It is A, the difference in our readings of our water gauge is 0.04. But this one is a plus. So 0.04. So now how do we get to where we take the filters out? We don't want to cheat ourselves, right? So we have to add to the 1 inch the 0.04 because it was higher. So now we would take the filters out at 1.04 inches. You see how we did that? It's really a very simple system. But by using this system by Meyer Global, you will see that you will have accuracy you never had before in installing your filters and taking out your filters. And remember again, I want to stress, the Magnehelic Gauge is just a guide. Always inspect your filters. You don't want to walk in there and see filters breaking apart and say, well, it only reads an inch. It might really read an inch 0.5 or inch 0.606, depending on where your filters started. That's the most important thing to know. So in this class today, I hope we've stressed to you the major points about the Magnehelic Gauge and how to read it properly so you can actually save money by taking the filters out on time. Last but not least, available through Meyer Global Filters only, okay, we have on our website, www.meyerglobalfilters.com, free DVDs available, including this class. The first one is on the lead Mervyn Green fine fiber, coarse fiber. Also, the Magnehelic class is now available. And our newest class is our mold control class on DVD. A lot of things you never knew, misconceptions, how to clean, all on this DVD. So, again, as I stress, go to Meyer Global Filters, www.meyerglobalfilters.com, on the web, and you can find out a lot more information about all of these DVDs. Thank you.